On the day my wife passed away, I said nothing about the $28 million inheritance or the skyscraper in Boston under my name. That same night, my stepdaughter-in-law Evelyn screamed, "Pack your bags, the old leech doesn't stay here." I said, "Okay." Then I decided to do something that I'm glad I did. Follow my story until the end to see how it all unfolded. I'm Arthur Henderson, and I'm 65 years old. On the day my wife Beatrice died, I thought the worst pain I could ever feel was losing the woman I'd loved for 22 years. I was wrong. The worst pain came 12 hours later when her own children showed me exactly what they thought I was worth. The funeral had been everything Beatrice would have wanted. Dignified, respectful, filled with people whose lives she'd touched during her years working as a school librarian. I sat in the front pew wearing my dark gray suit. The one she always said made me look handsome, holding my composure like a shield. Everyone kept whispering about what a devoted husband I'd been, how I'd cared for her through those final 8 months of illness without a single complaint. If only they knew the half of it. Beatrice's oldest daughter, Clara, gave a beautiful eulogy. Her youngest son, Thomas, read a poem. Even her middle son, Julian, managed to say something kind about me, or so I thought. I listened to it all, nodding when appropriate, accepting condolences with quiet grace. Everyone seemed to forget I wasn't just the stepfather who married their mother 22 years ago. I was her husband, the one who had stood by her through thick and thin. The reception afterward was held at our house. Well, what everyone assumed was Beatrice's house. I watched as family members I barely knew picked through the photo albums, as distant cousins calculated the value of our furniture with their eyes. Clara's husband, Philip, kept asking pointed questions about Beatrice's bank accounts, while Julian's wife, Evelyn, made comments about how much the property must be worth. But it was Evelyn who really caught my attention. She'd married Julian just 3 years ago, and from day one, she'd made it clear she thought I was taking up space in this family. A freeloading retired structural engineer who'd married Beatrice for her money, even though she had no idea what Beatrice's financial situation actually was, or where our money came from. All day, she'd been watching me with this calculating look in her eyes. When I'd excuse myself to check on the coffee, she'd be whispering with Clara in the corner. When I'd sit down for a moment to rest, she'd give me these cold little smiles that made my skin crawl. The last guest left around 8:30 in the evening. I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher with shaking hands when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that stopped right at the kitchen threshold. "Well, that's over with," Evelyn announced. I didn't turn around. I kept loading plates, focusing on the simple task to keep my grief from overwhelming me. "Thank you for helping organize everything," I said quietly. "Beatrice would have appreciated it." "Cut the act, Arthur." Her voice was sharp, cutting. I finally turned around. Evelyn stood there with her arms crossed, still wearing her black funeral dress, but having shed any pretense of mourning. Behind her, Julian shifted uncomfortably. Clara and Thomas flanked them, creating what felt like a tribunal. "I'm sorry?" I managed Evelyn step closer. "The grieving widower routine. You can drop it now. We need to talk about practical matters." My hands stilled on the dishwasher. What practical matters? This house, Beatrice's assets, the family estate. She said each word like she was explaining something to a child. "Julian and I have discussed it with Clara and Thomas. We think it's best if you start looking for your own place." The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. "My own place?" Clara cleared her throat. "What Evelyn means is this house is quite large for one person, Arthur. And frankly, the upkeep costs alone are going to be too much for a retired engineer on a fixed pension." "Are you telling me to leave?" I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I'm telling you to be realistic. You're 65 years old, Arthur. Beatrice took care of you while she was alive, but now you need to think about downsizing, finding something more appropriate to your situation." "My situation?" "Well, you've been living off Beatrice's retirement and the house she owned," Evelyn said dismissively. "This house, your lifestyle, your security. But that was Beatrice's success. The family needs to make some hard decisions about her estate. We want to sell the house." I felt something cold settle my chest. "This is my home. I've lived here for 20 years. "And it's been wonderful, I'm sure," Julian said, finally speaking up. "But Mom would want us to be practical. There are 3 of us kids, plus the grandchildren to think about. College funds, debt payments. Beatrice left a will, I said. Yes, and we'll honor whatever small provision she made for you, Evelyn said. But let's be honest about what this is. You were her second husband, not her business partner. You didn't build this estate, you were just there. The words hit me like physical blows, just there. After 22 years of marriage, after caring for her through cancer, after building a life together, I was just there. I think you should pack your things tonight, Evelyn continued. Julian and I can stay here starting tomorrow to get the house ready for listing. It'll be easier for everyone if we handle Beatrice's affairs directly. I looked at Julian silently, pleading with him to defend me, to remember that I'd been his stepfather since he was 10 years old. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. Evelyn shrugged. There are some lovely senior apartments downtown. Assisted living facilities. I'm sure you'll find something suitable for your budget. Assisted living. She was talking to me like I was some helpless old man who couldn't take care of herself. I stood there in my own kitchen, surrounded by people I'd considered family for over 2 decades, and felt the last pieces of my heart break. The grief from losing Beatrice was nothing compared to this betrayal. But as I looked at their faces, Evelyn's cruel satisfaction, the others' uncomfortable but determined expressions, something else began to grow alongside the pain, something cold, quiet, and patient. Okay, I said simply. Evelyn blinked. Okay, I'll pack tonight. I'll be gone in the morning. The silence that followed was deafening. I think they'd expected me to fight, to beg, to make a scene that would justify their treatment of me. Instead, I turned back to the dishwasher and continued loading plates. Well, Evelyn said, clearly thrown off balance. Good, that's very mature of you. I didn't respond. I just kept working, listening as their footsteps retreated from the kitchen. I heard their hushed, excited whispers from the living room as they began dividing up my life. They had no idea what they'd just done. They thought they were getting rid of a burden, claiming what was rightfully theirs. They thought Beatrice's widower was just an old man with nowhere to go. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As I closed the dishwasher and listened to it hum to life, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Tomorrow my real life would begin, and theirs was about to get very, very complicated. I packed 2 suitcases that night, just 2. Everything else, the antique books, the artwork, the designer furniture, Clara was probably already cataloging in her head, I left behind. Let them think they were getting it all. Let them believe the grieving stepfather was walking away defeated. With nothing but some old clothes and memories, the Hampton Inn on Route 1 became my temporary home. It wasn't the Ritz, but it had a business center, reliable Wi-Fi, and it was anonymous. I checked in under my middle name, Arthur Bradley, and paid cash for a week. The desk clerk barely looked at me. Just another senior citizen traveling alone. Invisible was exactly what I needed to be right now. The first call I made was to Harold Steinberg. Harold had been my personal attorney for 25 years. Not that anyone in Beatrice's family knew that. They assumed I was just a retired structural engineer with no assets of my own, that Harold only handled minor family matters. Arthur. Harold's voice was warm when he answered. I'm so sorry for your loss. Beatrice was a wonderful woman. Thank you, Harold. I need to see you tomorrow if possible. Of course. 10 a.m. at the office? Actually, could we meet somewhere else? Somewhere private? There was a pause. Harold had known me long enough to read between the lines. The children are giving you trouble? Something like that. I'll text you the address. Harold arrived the next morning carrying a leather briefcase. I'd ordered coffee from room service. How bad is it? He asked, sitting in the room's only armchair. I told him about the funeral, about Evelyn's demands, about how Julian and Clara stood by and let her evict me from my own home. I told him how they dismissed me as an old leech who had never contributed anything to Beatrice's life. Harold's jaw tightened. Do they have any idea about Henderson Properties LLC? None whatsoever. Beatrice and I decided years ago to keep my business separate from the family. They always assumed she was the provider because she worked for the county, and I was content to let them believe that. And you're sure you want to proceed as we planned? I looked out the window. I'm sure. How long will it take? Harold opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. The preliminary documentation is ready. Under the quitclaim deed Beatrice signed in 2012, which we recorded with the Registry of Deeds, the house at 144 Oak Street belongs entirely to you. You paid off the $320. Zero's second mortgage using your personal funds from the Boston commercial sales. There is no legal ground for them to contest it. What about the bank accounts? That's where they've made a serious mistake, Harold said, his expression hardening. Our audit of Beatrice's accounts shows that 2 weeks ago, while Beatrice was in the ICU and unresponsive, a transfer of $85,000 was made from her personal savings to a joint account owned by Julian and Evelyn. It was authorized using a power of attorney document. I never saw a power of attorney, I said. Neither did Beatrice, Harold replied. The signature on that document is a clear forgery. Under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 19A, this is a textbook case of elder financial abuse. By law, Julian and Evelyn are facing civil liability to return the funds and criminal charges for forgery. The power of attorney they used is void ab initio, completely invalid from the start. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my bones. So they thought they were stealing from a dying woman, and now they've walked right into a trap. Precisely, Harold said. Technically, we could have the police evict them from the house today and file charges immediately. But I assume you want to handle this differently? I want them to show me exactly who they are first, I said. Let them get comfortable in my house. Let them plan how they're going to spend the money they think they're inheriting. Let them hang themselves with their own greed, and then we will show them the truth. Harold spent the next hour walking me through the paperwork. Most seniors would have been overwhelmed by the legal terminology, but I had spent decades managing commercial real estate contracts. I knew exactly what each clause meant. After Harold left, I drove back to the neighborhood. I parked my rental car across the street and watched through the tinted windows. A moving truck was already backed up to the driveway. Evelyn was standing on the porch, pointing and directing the movers. She wasn't just clearing things out. She was moving her own things in. She had already claimed my home as her own. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. Hope you found a place, Arthur. Evelyn is getting Mom's things sorted out. We found some old financial records in the desk. We need you to come by and explain some bank statements next week. I didn't reply. I deleted the text and smiled. Let them search the house. Let them look through Beatrice's old desk drawers. They wouldn't find my real files there. Those were in a safety deposit box at Boston First National Bank, along with the deeds to my Boston office tower, the contracts for my properties, and the proof of the $28 million inheritance I'd built over a lifetime of quiet investing. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon visiting my local banking branch. I had an appointment with Elena Cole, my personal wealth manager at Boston Trust Bank. Elena welcomed me with professional sympathy. Mr. Henderson, I was so sorry to hear about Beatrice. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected, Elena. I need to make some account adjustments. She nodded, assuming I was going to update my estate documents or consolidate a small savings account. Instead, I handed her the new corporate structuring papers Harold prepared. Her eyes widened as she ran the numbers on her screen. Mr. Henderson, these transfers. I had no idea your personal holdings had grown to this size. Privacy has always been important to me, Elena, but circumstances have changed. Let's execute the transfers immediately. As she processed the paperwork, I imagined Julian and Evelyn back at the house, looking through Beatrice's modest bank books. They were probably calculating their inheritance down to the last penny, thinking they were splitting a few $100,000. The truth would be so much more devastating when it finally came. Later, as I drove back to the Fairmont Hotel, where I had booked a suite for the weekend, my phone rang. It was Evelyn. I let it go to voicemail. Arthur, we're going through Beatrice's files, her voice said. There are some bank records here that don't make sense. We need you to call us back and explain where some of the household funds went. I deleted the voicemail. Let them worry. Let them try to figure out why the numbers didn't add up. On Monday, they would get their answers. Monday afternoon arrived, gray and rainy. I dressed carefully in a tailored dark blue suit, putting on my Cartier watch, a gift from a major commercial client years ago. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a man of substance who had simply chosen to be underestimated. I arrived at Carter and Associates at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting. The office was in a sleek corporate park, the kind of place that charged high fees to make middle-class families feel important. The receptionist looked me over with a polite but dismissive smile. "Arthur Henderson?" she asked, checking her screen. "For the Henderson estate reading? The others are already in the main conference room." Before I could answer, Harold arrived, accompanied by Catherine Walsh, a sharp, elegant litigator I'd retained to handle the estate disputes. Catherine gave me a brief nod, her eyes cold and professional. "Ready, Arthur?" Harold asked. "Let's go," I said. As we walked down the corridor, I could hear Evelyn's voice echoing from the conference room. "It's a simple matter, Dennis," she was telling their attorney, Mr. Dennis Carter. "We just need him to sign over the title to the house. There's no reason to drag this out. He has no legal right to stay there anyway. The surviving spouse has statutory rights, Evelyn," Mr. Carter replied, his voice calm but cautious. "We have to follow the process." We walked in, and the room fell silent. Julian and Evelyn sat on one side of the large mahogany table. Clara and Thomas were next to them, looking uncomfortable. Dennis Carter sat at the head of the table, papers spread before him. Evelyn glared at me, her eyes flitting to Harold and then to Catherine. "Why did you bring two lawyers, Arthur? We're just here to read the will. There's no need to make this dramatic." "Mr. Henderson is entitled to representation," Harold said, taking a seat across from Julian. I sat between Harold and Catherine. Dennis Carter cleared his throat. "Well, let's begin. I have the last will and testament of Beatrice Henderson, dated June 14, 2018. It was drafted by my firm." He began reading in a dry, monotonous tone. The standard legal jargon, the burial wishes, the small donations to the local library where Beatrice had worked. Then came the distribution of assets. "To my children, Clara Vance, Julian Henderson, and Thomas Henderson, I leave the sum of $50,000 each to be paid from my personal savings account." Julian frowned. "Wait, only $50,000? Mom had more than that." "Let him finish, Julian," Clara whispered, though she looked disappointed too. Mr. Carter continued. "To my husband, Arthur Henderson, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all personal property, vehicles, and any financial accounts held in my name." "And the house?" Evelyn demanded, leaning forward. "What about the house on Oak Street? That's worth at least $750,000. Mr. Carter looked up, adjusting his glasses. "The house is not mentioned in the will, Mrs. Henderson. Because, according to the title search we conducted this morning, the house is not part of the estate." "What do you mean it's not part of the estate?" Evelyn's voice rose. "Beatrice bought that house with her first husband. It was her house." Catherine Walsh stood up, opening her leather portfolio. She slid a document across the table. It was a certified copy of the quitclaim deed. On November 12, 2012, Beatrice Henderson executed a quitclaim deed, transferring the property at 144 Oak Street to Arthur Henderson as sole owner, Catherine said. The deed was properly notarized and recorded with the Middlesex County Registry of Deeds. Mr. Henderson paid off the outstanding $320,000 second mortgage on the property using his own capital. The transfer was absolute. Evelyn grabbed the paper, her eyes scanning it frantically. "This is a lie. Arthur didn't have $320,000. He was just a retired engineer living off Beatrice's salary. She must have been coerced into signing this." The signing was witnessed by two independent parties and notarized by a licensed public notary, Harold said. "And the funds used to pay off the mortgage came from Mr. Henderson's personal account at Boston Trust Bank. There was no coercion. It was a business decision to save the property from foreclosure after Julian's failed restaurant venture drained Beatrice's savings." Julian flinched, his face turning red. "That was a loan," he muttered. "A loan you never repaid," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "I paid off the mortgage to keep your mother from losing her home, and in return she wanted the house to be mine." "This is ridiculous." Evelyn slammed her hand on the table. "Dennis, do something. We can contest this deed, right? Arthur is a gold digger. He manipulated her." Mr. Carter looked at the deed, then at Catherine. "If the deed is valid and was recorded 10 years ago, the statute of limitations to contest it has long passed. And if Mr. Henderson paid off the debt, there's a clear exchange of value. Legally, the house belongs to him." "But what about the business?" Clara asked. Mom said she had investments. What about the Boston property? The Boston property you are referring to, Catherine Walsh said, sliding another folder across the table, is a commercial office tower on Federal Street. It is owned by Henderson Properties LLC, a company founded by Arthur Henderson in 1996, 6 years before he met your mother. Beatrice Henderson had no ownership interest in this company. But she was the president, Julian argued. Her name was on the letters. She was the honorary vice president, a title Mr. Henderson gave her to make her feel included. Catherine corrected. She held 0% of the shares. The company's assets, which include 3 commercial buildings in Boston and a portfolio valued at $28 million, belong entirely to Arthur Henderson. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the rain tapping against the window pane. Julian's mouth was slightly open. Evelyn's face had gone from red to a deathly pale white. $28 million, Thomas whispered, looking at me in shock. Arthur, you have $28 million? Actually, the total portfolio value of Henderson Properties LLC combined with my personal liquid assets is closer to $47 million, I said calmly. I was financially independent long before I met your mother. I simply preferred to live a quiet life. Beatrice and I agreed to keep my business separate to protect it, and because she wanted you kids to learn the value of hard work rather than waiting for an inheritance. I looked directly at Evelyn. The same inheritance you were so eager to claim that you threw me out of my own home the night my wife died. Evelyn looked like she was suffocating. Arthur, we didn't know. You thought I was a helpless old man you could push around, I said. You thought you could take everything and leave me with nothing. You were wrong. Dennis Carter leaned back, staring at the documentation in front of him. He sighed and rubbed his temples, looking like a man who regretted taking the case. Julian Evelyn? Mr. Carter said, his voice flat. I'm advising you to stop speaking. Mr. Henderson's documentation is ironclad. The quitclaim deed is legal. The company assets are entirely his. There is no legal avenue for you to contest any of this. Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, her chest heaving. But we're her children. We lived in that house. We have rights. You have no rights to a property owned by someone else, Catherine Walsh said smoothly. But that is not the most pressing issue you face today. She pulled a third folder from her briefcase, this one thin but heavy with implications. Let's discuss the $85,000 transfer from Beatrice Henderson's personal account at Boston Trust Bank, which occurred exactly 14 days ago. Julian went pale. Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to maintain her defensive posture. That was for Mother's care. She authorized it. Beatrice Henderson was in the ICU at Boston General Hospital 14 days ago, Catherine replied, her voice cutting like a scalpel. She was intubated and unresponsive. I have the medical logs right here. She could not have signed anything, let alone a power of attorney document. Yet a power of attorney was presented to the bank, signed by Julian and notarized by a notary public who happens to be a close friend of yours, Evelyn. Harold leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. Under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 19A, this is a clear case of elder financial abuse. Specifically, it is civil and criminal fraud. The power of attorney is void ab initio, meaning it was never valid. And because the signature was forged, you are looking at charges of uttering a forged document, which carries a prison sentence of up to 10 years in this state. The conference room felt like it had lost all oxygen. Thomas looked at Julian in horror. Julian? You forged Mom's name? While she was dying. We needed the money, Julian stammered, looking at the table. The restaurant debts, they were going to sue us. We thought we would just pay it back when the estate was settled. You stole from your dying mother, and in doing so, you stole from Arthur, Clara said, her voice trembling with disgust. I can't believe you did this. Evelyn was shaking now, the arrogance completely draining from her face. She looked at me, her voice suddenly small and trembling. Arthur, please, we were desperate. The restaurant was failing, and we had bills. We didn't mean to— You meant to take everything, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You wanted the house, the money, and you wanted me gone. You didn't care if I was on the street. You called me a leech. You said I was just there. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. Here is what is going to happen. I will give you exactly 72 hours to remove your belongings from my house at 144 Oak Street. I have already arranged for a locksmith to change the locks at 6 p.m. on Friday. If you are still on the property, you will be arrested for trespassing." "And the 85,000? Julian whispered. "You will return every penny to the estate accounts within 30 days, I said. "If you do, I will instruct Harold not to press criminal charges. If you don't, I will personally hand this file to the district attorney. The choice is yours." I walked out of the conference room, Harold and Catherine following close behind. As the heavy glass door shut, I could hear Evelyn sobbing and Julian arguing with Dennis Carter. The reckoning had begun. By Wednesday evening, the reality of their situation had clearly set in. My phone had been ringing constantly, mostly calls from Julian that I ignored. Finally, around 8 p.m., I decided to answer. "Arthur, please." Julian's voice was broken. He sounded like he was crying. "Evelyn is packing. We're moving our things back to our old apartment. We're leaving the house. Just please, don't send us to jail. We don't have the $85,000 right now. We spent most of it on the restaurant debt." "You have 30 days to find it, Julian," I said. "Sell your car, take out a loan, figure it out." "But Evelyn's parents, they're furious," Julian pleaded. "They came over to help us pack, and when they found out what we did, they walked out. Evelyn's father said he won't give us a dime. We have no one else to turn to." "You had me," I reminded him. "I raised you from the time you were 10 years old. I paid for your college. I paid off your mother's mortgage. I gave you every opportunity to be a family. But the moment your mother died, you let your wife throw me out like trash. I was weak. Arthur, I should have stopped her." "I'm sorry," Julian sobbed. "Your apology isn't about remorse, Julian. It's about fear," I said. "You're only sorry because you got caught and realized I have the power to ruin you. I'm changing the locks on Friday. Make sure you're gone." I hung up and felt a deep, quiet peace. For years I had let them think I was nothing, protecting their feelings and trying to be a good stepfather. But some people only respect power, and now they knew exactly who held it. On Friday at exactly 6 p.m., I arrived at 144 Oak Street. I was accompanied by a local locksmith, and a deputy sheriff, Harold, had arranged to ensure there were no issues. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw that the house was quiet. The front lawn, which had been littered with moving boxes just days ago, was empty. I walked up the front steps. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and as I pushed the door open, the silence of the empty house greeted me. The furniture was still there, but all of Evelyn's decorative touches were gone. The kitchen was clean. The dishwasher, which had been the site of our final confrontation, stood empty and quiet. The locksmith went to work, changing the deadbolts on the front and back doors, as well as the garage entry. Within 30 minutes, I held a set of new brass keys in my hand. The house was mine again. But as I walked through the empty rooms, looking at the spots on the walls where Beatrice's favorite paintings had hung, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, empty peace. I had won the battle, but the war had cost me the family I had tried to build for 22 years. 6 months passed quickly. I spent my time traveling, visiting the properties in Boston, and reorganizing Henderson Properties LLC. Without the burden of hiding my wealth to protect the children's work ethic, I was able to manage my affairs openly. I bought a small, beautiful townhouse near the harbor and decided to put the Oak Street house on the market. It was time to let go of the past. One Tuesday morning in late October, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but it had a local area code. "Mr. Arthur Henderson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Arthur. This is Dr. Sarah Bennett at Massachusetts General Hospital. We have a patient here, Julian Henderson, who was admitted following a car accident. He's stable, but he's asking for you. He listed you as his emergency contact." I sat in silence for a moment. My first instinct was to tell her that Julian had siblings, that Clara and Thomas should be called instead. But when I asked, Dr. Bennett explained that Julian's phone had only 2 contacts listed: his brother Thomas, who hadn't answered, and me. 40 minutes later, I walked into room 312 of the hospital's orthopedic ward. Julian lay in the bed, his right leg suspended in a traction cast, his face bruised and scraped. He looked small, tired, and much older than his 32 years. He looked up as the door clicked shut. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears, and he looked away, embarrassed. "Arthur," he whispered, "you actually came." "The hospital called," I said, pulling up a chair. "They said you asked for me. I didn't think you'd come, he said, wiping his face with his uninjured hand. After what we did, after everything, how are you feeling, Julian? Like I got hit by a truck. Well, a tree, actually. I lost control on the highway. He sighed, staring at the ceiling. I've lost control of everything, Arthur. Where is Evelyn? I asked. Julian laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Gone. She left 3 months ago, the moment the bank accounts were frozen and we had to pay back the $85,000. She decided she didn't want to be married anymore. She took the last $12,000 from our joint business account and moved back to her parents in Ohio. Her father hired a lawyer to handle the divorce. I haven't heard from her since. And the money, I sold the restaurant equipment, Julian said. And my car, I paid back the full $85,000 to the estate account last month. Harold probably told you. He did. I nodded. I wanted to tell you something about the night we threw you out, Julian said, his voice cracking. The night after the funeral. I knew it was wrong, Arthur. I stood in that kitchen and saw you loading the dishwasher, and I wanted to tell Evelyn to shut up. But I was so scared of losing her and so desperate for the house money to pay off the restaurant debts that I let it happen. I sold my soul for a shortcut, and I ended up with nothing. He looked at me, his eyes raw with emotion. I'm not asking for money, Arthur, and I'm not apologizing because I'm scared of jail anymore. The money is paid back and the law is done with me. I'm apologizing because I miss my stepfather. You were the only real father I ever had, and I threw you away for a woman who didn't even love me. I looked at Julian, seeing the little 10-year-old boy who had lost his father and had clung to my hand at the baseball games. The anger that had sustained me for 6 months began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, sad understanding. He had paid a terrible price for his greed. His marriage was ruined, his business was gone, and his pride was shattered. It will take a long time, Julian, I said quietly. He looked at me, a spark of hope in his eyes. I know. I'm not going to give you a job, and I'm not going to give you money, I continued. But when you get out of this hospital, if you want to have dinner and talk about how you're going to rebuild your life, my door is open. Julian nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you. As I walked out of the hospital into the crisp autumn air, I realized something. True power isn't about how much money you have in the bank or how many buildings you own. It isn't about destroying those who hurt you, even when they deserve it. True power is the ability to choose when to hold the line and when to extend a hand. Beatrice had wanted her children to learn the value of hard work and integrity. It had taken a devastating fall for Julian to finally start learning that lesson, but he was starting. And as his stepfather, I would be there to watch him build a real foundation this time.